The Great Southern Land. I often begin with this because it still amazes me. We have some of the longest stretch of the coastline in the world, facing south. It's a bit of coastline that gets exposed to everything that the Southern Ocean can unleash, complete from the Antarctic. We have areas of high nutrient upwellings which support amazing productivity and growth. And we have over 400 plus species of fish living in that region. Over 7,000 different invertebrates. 90% of them can actually be found nowhere else in the world. And we have incredible diversity of macroalgae, up to 2,000 plus species. And at one stage, I think there was being a species discovered every day, which is supporting a whole vast range of different organisms that live within it. Our threats to the reef and systems consist of a whole variety of different things. It can be as simple as turbidity and sedimentation. Often we find along the Metro Coast, we have a massive dredging campaign to clean our marinas out. And from that we have a massive dredge spoil that disappears up and down, or transports up and down that coastline. We have stormwater events, and now we're getting to extreme events where we have vast amounts of sediment being discharged into the ocean. We have nutrient enrichment, and that's not just only from stormwater but wastewater treatment plants as well. Along that we have a whole pile of different toxidants. I love extract resource use, which is a euphemism for things such as fishing. Coastal development, salinity, and it's not just the only threat from an increase in salinity from desalination plants, but also you have reductions in salinity from massive amounts of water being pushed offshore. And nowadays we have also a whole variety of different opportunistic exotic taxa, which can be released simply from aquarium plants being dumped into West Lakes, to ship ballast, dumping a whole variety of different organisms into the Port River. Ooh, clever. I'm going to give up on this one as well. Yeah, she's... The big thing we struggle with is defining what is normal. It's actually a question I ask myself every day when I look at my small child. And what do we consider actually to be a normal reef ecosystem? Generally we consider a reef system looking healthy is something like that in the picture. Unhealthy looks barren and bare, covered in a whole variety of different fluffy brown algae. But it's very difficult for us to actually say what we consider to actually be a healthy reef. We generally have this perception that it's covered in a robust brown canopy cover. Macroalgae, I call it the three-dimensional architecture of the oceans. They support a whole variety of things. They change light into carbon. Carbon feeds a whole variety of different microorganisms which feed up through the food chain up to the larger fish. Fish use it for habitat and nursery grounds. It provides a whole different role in a variety of different ways. When we look at things like turfing algae growing along, as you see in this picture, we consider it to be unhealthy, which says it supports very little biodiversity, very little ecosystem. And bare substrate marine systems we generally consider to be bad. If you put anything in marine, it's one of those boating nightmares. Anything bare is usually covered with something within days. And we spend a vast amount of money trying to prevent marine organisms growing on structures. We also have these opportunistic algae starting to develop. I think Dave Payton's shown that we've got olva species growing along the foreshore of the Coorong, and that's considered in many parts to be a sign that it's unhealthy. It's smothering different types of organisms. Along the Metro Beach we get a whole variety of different brown fluff growing in the waterways when we have high water temperature in summer. There's a species called Hinxia. But we're constantly coming back to this, what we consider to be a normal healthy reef. Way back in the 90s, a whole pile of academics were paid to do a lot of diving, which is great, by the EPA to look at the status of the reefs along the metropolitan coast. And from that, the techniques that were learnt, we developed the Reef Watch program, which started roughly about 1998. The main part of the Reef Watch program was education. That was considered a major driver, getting people used to getting into the water and looking at that great diversity that we see along our southern temperate reefs. But another very strong part was actually starting to collect data. Data is extremely important in your terrestrial or marine ecosystem. It's often very hard to collect. You can only spend about an hour underwater any one time. Unlike a day on the land, you can spend 8 hours walking around looking at things. And it's very important looking at what we consider to be the status of reef systems. And from that, we've had developed a subtitle and intertitle program. And the subtitle program has gone on for about 20 years. And from that, I would like to show some of the results that we've obtained. The program really started looking at 2 reefs, Halleck Cove and Noarlunga. Noarlunga is an aquatic reserve, I think from about 1974. And Halleck Cove was a quite highly popular reef that a lot of people visit basically to catch fish. But it has a unique ecosystem for the metropolitan coast. We also looked at other reefs like Broken Bottom, a bit further north, and down the south we looked at places like Second Valley and the Bluff. And we're looking at comparisons to see what the reefs were like along that piece of coastline. What is normal? And this is what we're looking at, data that we collected from Second Valley down south. And what it's showing here is the average percent cover for a variety of different things from canopy. So that's like the big browns, Eclonia, and the fucoids, Cystophora and Sargassum. Looking at a subcanopy, which is often formed of like green algae, macroalgae, like Caulerpa species. And then you come down to the bare substrate, the substrate cover, which is often associated with red algal species. And then bare, and then finally we've got some animals incorporated. And that could be a whole variety of different invertebrates, mainly sessile, things like ascidians, sponges, and bryozoans. And for Second Valley, we can see that we actually have quite a high algal cover. It's considered to be highly productive, getting up to about 80% cover along that reef. And when we look at things like the bare substrate, we see that we have very little bare substrate being exposed. And that's what we consider to be quite healthy. When we look at something like Halleck Cove, we see it being highly variable. We seem to have a whole pile of noise that makes it very difficult to decipher what we're actually looking at. Now this is average percent cover every year, so it can be collected from early in the summer days right through to winter, going on to spring. And we see that we have algal cover, the actual canopy cover, can be as high as 70% and drop down as low as 10%, and then rebound back up to as high as 80%. Now that might be associated with the species that are growing on that reef. This might be the normal pattern that we're seeing. Now we're not completely clear, but one thing is that we know is it's highly variable. It changes, goes from 10% up to 80%. But what's intriguing too is that we have very little bare cover, we do have bare cover that comes up and drops off. And yeah, underneath it, we actually have quite a high substrate cover. So we actually have some of the understory growing through when we don't have the upper story living there. But when we look at something like Noarlunga, and this is Noarlunga South inside, so it's looking at south of the jetty, inside the reef, we have a very different picture. Over time, we're finding that we started from quite a reasonable, I call it upper cover, a canopy cover, which reached us about as high as 50%. But over time, that canopy cover has actually been slowly reducing down to less than 10% and staying at below 10%. What's also intriguing is since about 2013, we're actually having a high degree of bare substrate suddenly coming into the equation. So we've got areas of reef that are remaining exposed and staying exposed, which is unusual, as I said, for marine ecosystems. Also, we seem to be the case, and what I didn't show the excuse me, looking down at south, we didn't have any mussels there at all, but here we seem to have quite a lot of mussels coming into the reef system. Again, whether this is good or bad, but it's suggesting that in the long-term picture, we're having an ecosystem that is actually changing quite dramatically. It's not highly variable, it's actually showing that it's going towards a system that's actually having bare substrate dominating with high degree of mussel cover and very low canopy structure. And this theoretically could lead to a decrease in biodiversity. Now it's intriguing, this is an aquatic reserve and it's been protected since 1974. And there's a suggestion that perhaps we're just loving it to death. We have over 5,000 divers going up and down that reef every year. It's one of the most popular dive sites in the region. As well as we have inputs from Onkaparinga and Christie Beach wastewater treatment plant just down the road. So all these could be just death by 1,000 cuts, and leading to that reduction in biodiversity. Interesting enough, the southern reef, and I don't have the data to show us here, on the outside is actually highly diverse. It has an extensive macroalgal cover and has high diversity of fish life. Again, I include what is normal. This is the big question that we're trying to actually deal with in looking at ecosystems. We can have a highly variable system. Is that good or bad? It's unclear, but it suggests that that system might be a function of the type of animals or plants that are growing on that reef. It's only when we look at long-term data sets, and this is the importance of collecting data over a long time, that we see a slow decrease that sends off the warning bells that potentially there's something going wrong on that reef system. And it's very difficult to obtain those long-term data sets. And it's only through programs like Reef Watch that we're actually able to obtain data like that. I've been involved over the years to do reef surveys, and one of the biggest problems we've got is haphazard. We only get out there every 5, 10, 15 years. And we don't always pick up the trends that seem to be occurring that are over that long time. If we see a data that is every 15 or 5 years, and we get that up and down, we're not too sure whether that's natural or whether that's a sign of something's going on that reef system. But if something like Noarlunga, where we're seeing it actually trending down over a long period of time, then I'd say we've got reason to be worried. So, as ecosystem change at Noarlunga, we seem to be losing habitat, and with that I think we're losing a whole degree of biodiversity associated with that habitat. Lessons learned from this whole program, long-term data sets are important. And from that we can start looking at, out of the noise, what potentially is happening on a reef system. The other side of it too is education. The Reef Watch program has literally educated thousands of people. They've got a chance to actually step into the water and look at what can, a reef system which they normally will not do. And the role of communities in science, I think the biggest role we have for the community in science is that long-term data set again. Is being able to collect data over a time frame that allows us to have meaningful pictures collected or make meaningful decisions from the data set. And that's basically about it. To say thank you for over 5,500 volunteers over the life. We've done over 3,200 dives. We've had over 11,000 people involved directly with the Reef Watch program. And from that, we've had thousands of subtitle and intertitle surveys. It's been an amazing effort. Thank you very much.